Greetings, YouTube. This past weekend I was talking to a fellow YouTuber about what her personal work history was. And it occurred to me that I don't think I've ever actually spoken about my personal work history. I mean, people know that I work in a factory, but I've actually had jobs before that. So, what could be considered my first real job was when I was 14. My mother was an accountant for a company that made string. Yes, string, twine, things like that. It was one of the last ones that produced that kind of thing in the U.S. It was a very old building. It was in horrible shape, and they needed someone to come in on the weekends and sweep the factory floor up. You have no idea how hard it is to sweep string remnants off of an old wooden floor full of splinters. It was no fun at all. Now, having a 14-year-old on a factory floor violates so many state and federal safety rules. It is ridiculous. Even back in the 70s, it was ridiculous. But no one seemed to question this fact, and they let me be there for 3 to 4 hours at a stretch on a Saturday, all by myself. It was nuts. Between 14 and 18, I did a bunch of odd jobs. Actually, 17. I did a bunch of odd jobs. Mostly a babysitting kind of thing, that sort of thing. Which is when I discovered I really didn't want to be a parent. So I guess in that regard, babysitting was helpful. The summer after high school, I was a handyman at a private school. It was run and owned by a friend's father, and I needed a gig. He needed someone to putz around and do things in the place that needed to get fixed. I was it. I did that for the summer. It was pretty cool. The building was beautiful. It had been a mansion at one time. I mean, this place was palatial. The library was the size of my apartment. It was awesome. And years later, they knocked it down and put up an apartment building. It broke my heart when that building got knocked down. After that, I was hired by the Union Leader Corporation, the largest paper printed here in the state of New Hampshire, and I worked in the mailroom. Didn't have a lot of hours, but I needed money because my mother had me paying rent the day she stopped getting child support from me the day I turned 18. So I had to come up with some money. I think I was paying $55 or $60 a week, some wonderfully obnoxiously low level. To have bills like that now. I did that for a bit, like a year or so, I think it was. And then I moved on to a pet store. And I liked animals. I still like animals. I've got cats. You've seen the videos. And I worked there taking care of the animals, and I don't actually remember how long I worked there. It was a cool gig, though. They had some nice people, and the manager was a really nice guy. Unfortunately, the really nice manager quit. He had things he wanted to do with his wife. They were getting a family going, and they had decided they wanted to go into dog breeding full-time. So he left. And the person that replaced him was the girlfriend of the owner. And she called me into her office, and I looked at her and I said, "You're going to fire me, right?" And she looked at me and she said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, bye." So technically, she didn't fire me. My next job after that, I was unemployed for a little bit. And then I found a job at the company I am working at now. I was 19, and it was the first factory job I ever had. And I started on the line making polyurethane parts, seals, gaskets, that kind of thing. Some car parts, truck parts, a few airplane parts. And I think we even did special pads that were about this big that were designed to be put on tank treads so the tanks could roll down the street like in a parade without chewing up the street. It's pretty cool. Eventually I moved over into the trimming department, which trimmed the parts that I used to make. And I very quickly became a setup guy, and I loved being a setup man. And a setup man, he set the trimming machines up. I made sure that all of the things were in dimensions. I made sure the operators had all the paperwork and the parts and the tools and everything they needed. I fixed their problems. I tended to organize and do a little bit of scheduling. I did a lot of special jobs for the engineers, like, prototyping. I did a lot of prototyping, machining stuff. And I would also tend to come in on Saturdays and try to make up work where our sales staff would sell things that we didn't actually have, which unfortunately happened far, far more often than it should have. We had a very archaic inventory system back then. And I did that job for 5 years. It was 1989 when I quit because the company had begun a round of layoffs where they were laying people off, they were bringing them back. few weeks later, 5, 6 weeks later, they were laying them off again, and I wasn't going to be involved in that, man. So I quit, and I went off into the world. I got a temp job working for a company called Cushcraft Incorporated, and I've mentioned Cushcraft when I spoke about ham radios, because they're a ham radio company. They make antennas, or they did it at one time at least. And I did that for 8 years. For the most of that time, about 7.5 years of that time, I was the lead operator for the department, which has meant I was in charge of the department. I set the machines up. I made sure everything was in dimensions. I took care of the operators. I solved their problems. I figured out which jobs had to get done so they could get finished on time. And I also produced things myself. I'm good at that kind of thing. I enjoy it. But after 8 years, I got downsized. It was the time when our economy was in a slump, and what can you do? I was not the only one. My next gig was at a place called the Light Machine Corporation, and also we call it LMC. And they made tabletop lathes and mills. And big mills and lathes are used for making large parts of machine shops. Well, these were little things. Some of them were 4 foot square, but some of them were even smaller. They were like this big, a foot and a half high, that were designed for education. But they were all computer controlled, and I inspected all the stuff coming into the company to make sure it would function for us when we decided to build our machines. I was the incoming inspector. And I did that for 1.5 years when I got downsized again. Yay. It didn't help the fact that my boss got in a car accident and became brain damaged, so communication was a little difficult. Things kind of broke down as far as communicating what they needed and how I was going to achieve what they needed, so it didn't work out for us. And my next job was right back where I am now. I went back to the old company I'd been at. I got called up for an interview. The person that gave me the interview is someone I'd worked with in the 80s. It was the shortest interview I've ever had. He gave me a tour of the department, and he looked at me and he said, "You can do this, can't you?" I said, "Yep, I sure can, John." He said, "Okay, you're hired." And that was it. I started the next week. It's been 11 years. I started on the line again. I was an operator for a year. I then moved into inspection, and I was a floor inspector for 5 years. The department I was in was transferred from the town I'm in to Franklin, New Hampshire, and I had no desire to go with it because it would have added a 45-minute ride to work every day, a commute, and I would have lost $3 an hour. Not a good deal. So I stayed here in Manchester. The company decided that the place they wanted me to go next was being an operator again. So I'm an operator now, and I've been doing it for about 5 years. Like I said, I just celebrated my 11th anniversary last October. I have no idea how long we're going to be there. I know that the property we're on, I don't think anybody's interested besides us. We lease it. We don't own it. But I think we have it as long as we want to at the moment. The building we have is very large. We have 3 buildings, each of which is the size of an aircraft hangar. To get from one end of the last built building to the beginning of the other building, it's over a 1/4 mile in distance. You don't want to be making that journey unless you have to. But that's what I've done. I've spent the last 27 years in some kind of manufacturing. I'm good at it. It's what I do. I like parts. I like measuring things. I enjoy inspection. And I gotta tell you, being an operator sometimes is pleasant because I don't have to think a whole lot. I can just do the gig, and at the end of the day, I go home. And I don't take a whole lot with me. You know what I mean? I leave my job at my job. So, what do you do for a living? Have you had any interesting jobs in your past? Anything that was cool? Anything that was dangerous? Like, for example, being 14 and in a factory all by your lonesome? Have you done anything that was, completely and utterly out of the ordinary? Something that no one else in this comment thread is going to post?